Welcome to this explainer. Today we're tackling something that is intensely human, incredibly universal, and honestly just really tough. We're talking about grief. Specifically, the absolutely shattering grief of losing a child or a deeply loved one. But look, we're not just going to dwell on the pain today. We're actually exploring the pathways through it. We're going to take this fascinating journey, put in an ancient text right next to modern clinical psychology, to figure out how we actually heal. It's a look at how love literally survives the unthinkable. So let's jump right in.
Section 1. A Father's Deepest Grief. The ancient story of King David. Okay, let's dive into this. We're looking at one of the most agonizing stories in our source text. A father facing what is, without a doubt, a parent's absolute worst nightmare.
Now, what's really interesting here is the timeline of his reaction, because honestly, it completely flips our expectations of how grief is supposed to work. See, while his infant son was severely ill, David was just inconsolable. He fasted, he wept, he literally spent entire nights lying on the bare ground just pleading for his child's life. He was completely paralyzed by the thought of this loss. But then, the unthinkable happens. The child passes away. And what does David do? He gets up off the ground, he washes himself, he goes to worship, and then he asks for food and he eats. It's a stunning, almost jarring contrast, right? If you're sitting there thinking, wait a second, that makes absolutely zero sense, hey, you are in very good company. David's own servants were completely baffled by this. They basically asked him, what are you doing? When the baby was alive, you were crying and fasting, but now that he's gone, you're up and eating. And we really need to pause here for a second. It's crucial to acknowledge that the story doesn't hand us simple, neat little answers. It doesn't just explain away the tragic mystery of a child's death. The confusion those servants felt, that's exactly our own confusion when we're faced with profound, devastating loss.
So how does David answer these completely bewildered servants? He hits them with this incredibly profound realization. He says, I shall go to him, but he will not return to me. Just let the weight of that sit with you for a second. He's accepting this harsh, unyielding reality that his son isn't coming back to this life. But watch what he does here. These words, they don't erase his sorrow. They don't magically fix this massive gaping hole in his universe. But they do something absolutely vital. They give his sorrow a direction. He realizes the bond hasn't been destroyed, it's just shifted.
And that brings us to this deep, lingering question. How does love actually survive when death comes? I mean, if the person we pour all this affection into is physically gone, what happens to all that love? Where does it go? Does it just evaporate? For a really long time, both society and science kind of dropped the ball on this, giving grieving people some pretty unhelpful advice. But David's ancient wisdom actually points us straight toward a very modern psychological breakthrough. Let's look at how this builds.
Section 2. The Psychology of Continuing Bonds, a Paradigm Shift in Grief Research. So, we're shifting gears from ancient history to modern science. We're going to look at this massive shift that happened in psychology late in the 20th century. Because as you'll see, modern clinical research actually backs up David's ancient, counterintuitive response.
For decades, the standard psychological advice was all about letting go and moving on. The idea was that healing meant severing that emotional tie so you could take your energy and put it somewhere else. But the new, evidence-based understanding, it flips that script completely. Healing does not mean moving on. It means finding a new way to remain connected. Sure, the relationship changes entirely, absolutely. But the love remains.
And this brilliantly illustrates the concept that formalized this whole shift. It's called continuing bonds. This framework was introduced in a huge 1996 book by psychologists Dennis Klass, Phyllis Silverman, and Stephen Nickman, and it was a real game changer for grief therapy. It essentially proved that maintaining a lasting, internal connection with the person who died isn't unhealthy. It's not pathological. It is actually a healthy, scientifically validated path to healing. You don't just get over the person, you carry them forward with you.
Section 3. Grieving with Love. Carrying the bond forward. All right, so how do we actually do this? How do we take this clinical framework and this ancient wisdom and apply it to our real lives? If you or someone you know is navigating deep loss, our source material outlines some really beautiful, practical ways to keep that bond alive, day to day.
The material makes one thing absolutely emphatically clear. You do not have to remove your child or any lost loved one from your heart in order to heal. For way too long, well-meaning people have pushed grievers to find quote-unquote closure, as if just slamming the door on your love is the only way to survive the pain. But this material tells us the exact opposite. You do not have to act like the love is over, because it's not. Your pain is valid precisely because your love is still active.
Here are some of the very real, tender ways we can maintain that continuing bond that the text suggests. You can carry your loved one forward in prayer, just speaking to them or to God about them. Through memory, actively sharing their stories instead of just locking them away in a box. Through gratitude for the time you did have. Through tears, which, if you think about it, are really just a physical manifestation of unspent love. And finally, through hope. That quiet, stubborn belief David had that the story isn't entirely over. Both faith and modern psychology are handing us the exact same invitation here. They are inviting us to grieve with love.
So the crucial point is this. Death changes the relationship, but it does not destroy love. This is the ultimate bridge between that ancient story of David and the modern psychological research of Klass, Silverman, and Nixman. Look, death is a thief of physical presence, for sure. It alters absolutely everything about how you interact, but it is entirely powerless against the bond of love itself. Love is the one thing that survives the transition.
Which brings us to this deeply comforting, incredibly spiritual truth found in our source text. In God, no love is wasted, no tear is unseen, and no child is forgotten. Take a second to just let the emotional weight of that land. Every single ounce of love you poured into that relationship still matters. Every tear you've shed in the dark is seen and acknowledged. That is the whole essence of a continuing bond. It's this unbroken thread that stretches from the absolute deepest pain of human loss straight into the eternal.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. We've seen how a grieving king found direction in his deepest sorrow, and how modern psychology now affirms that staying connected is exactly how we heal. The journey doesn't just end with the loss, it evolves. So the question you should be asking isn't how quickly you can move on. The real question is, how will you carry your continuing bond forward? Thank you so much for exploring this profound topic with me today. Take care and hold on to hope.